Hey everybody, how are you doing? I hope you're doing super good. I miss having you in my classroom, but for now it's best for us to stay safe, stay in our homes so that we may get through this together. And well, here's the second best option. So today we're going to be talking about the short story. We're going to see some things that we've talked about in the past. We're going to review those, and then we're going to look at some things that might be new to you, okay? If you have any questions, make sure that you ask me those on the Remind page or leave a comment, and I'll make sure to do the best that I can to clear those up. Okay, so let's begin. First of all, what is a short story? A short story is a fictional work of prose that is shorter in length than a novel. Many of you have seen novels, and this is much, much shorter than that. Edgar Allan Poe basically said that a short story should be read in one sitting. So that's anywhere from a half hour to 2 hours. Some of you might remember Edgar Allan Poe from stories like The Telltale Heart or the poem Annabel Lee. So that's what he said about short stories and their length. Regarding amount of words, usually they range from 1,000 to 20,000 words. So they're not necessarily one single page. They might be a few pages. 20,000 words is several pages. But they're still much shorter than a novel. It usually focuses on one single plot rather than having several subplots like in a novel, one main character with a few additional minor characters, and one central theme. Okay, so this may change in different stories, but we're talking about the general. Okay, so main idea or the message of the story. The main idea is the author's message about the topic, and it is often expressed directly, or it can be implied. When I say directly, I mean that it has been expressed explicitly, literally. The words are on the page and you can see the main idea of the story is this. Sometimes the main idea is implied, which means that it is not explicitly written and you have to use the details of the story, the evidence, to figure out what is the main idea. You need to use all of the context clues as you're reading to determine what the main idea or the message of the author is. Okay, so that's what it means by implied or implicit. Moving on to the elements of a short story, and I'll try to be quick in this section because I know that you've seen this before. We have character, plot, theme, point of view, conflict, and setting. Let's start with character. First of all, we know that a character is any individual. It can be a human being, and it can be an alien, an animal, but whoever the story is about. We usually have a protagonist versus an antagonist. So the protagonist is the main character. Here we have Black Panther, picture from Black Panther. The protagonist would be this character to the right. And then we usually have an antagonist, who is the force that goes against the protagonist in the story. In this case, it's this character to the left, if you've seen the movie. Then we have character development. So when we talk about character development, we talk about how well developed that character has been by the author, by the writer. Okay, so what that means is how many character traits can you identify for that one character? How well do you know that character? Do we know that character's thoughts or motivations or desires? Do we know virtually nothing, just maybe some physical descriptions, but not much more than that? So a character that we don't know much about, we can't identify many character traits, that is a flat character, okay? Flat. A character that we know plenty about, there's many character traits, is a round character. Okay, so think that you're putting all of those character traits inside that character's body and making it a round character. Okay, Then we have change. And what that means is whether a character has gone through a significant change from the beginning of the story towards the end. So basically, if the events of the plot have caused this character to undergo some sort of change. A character that does not change from the beginning to the end based on the events of the plot is a static character. That character has not moved in terms of its internal change. A character that does go through a change is a dynamic character. Now, I don't want you to think that just because a character doesn't change, it means that this character is bad or evil. It may not necessarily be the case. A character may be a good character that just stays good. I also don't want you to think about it only in terms of good and bad, even though I just used that example, because there are many ways in which a character can change. Okay? A character may have a specific motivation driving him or her at the beginning, and then that motivation changes because of what that character or individual finds out throughout the story. That's just another example. So if the events of the plot cause this character to go through change, that is a dynamic character. Okay, I hope you'll remember that. It might show up later on. Okay, now let's look at the plot. As you know, there is a plot diagram or plot structure that is composed of these 5 parts. First, we have the introduction. That's when you learn who is in the story, all of the characters involved, and the setting, which includes when and where. Okay, so remember that the setting isn't just where. It also includes the time. It may be the time of the year, it may be the time of the day, the time of the week. Okay, so all of those little details would be part of the setting. Then we have the rising action, which is where the story starts to become complicated and we realize that there is a conflict here. Okay, you realize there's a conflict. Later on, we'll talk about the types of conflict. Then we have the climax, and that is the highest point of interest in the story. That's the turning point, the most suspense. Okay? You don't know what's going to happen next, and you wonder, will the conflict get resolved? Will it not get fixed? What's going to happen? Then the falling action, we find out what actually happened in regards to that conflict, and we know if it was resolved or not. And then we have finally the denouement or the resolution, which is the final outcome or untangling of the events. Okay? Just so you can see it in a picture, here is the plot roller coaster, or as we also know it, the plot diagram. Sometimes I've told you it looks a little bit like a witch's hat. Okay, we have all the parts from when we find out who the characters are in the setting, we find out that there's some sort of conflict here. Now we know that there's a conflict and this is the highest point and we're thinking, is it going to get resolved? Is it not going to get resolved? Then we have the falling action, which is when we actually have the answer of whether it got resolved or not. And then here is the ending where we know how everything turned out. Okay, so I said we were going to talk a little bit about conflict, so here we go. First, we have person versus person. Okay, that one is the easiest, I would say. It's when I have a problem with another person, or let's say in your case, let's say that you have a problem with your friend because he or she is not talking to you very much anymore. You don't know why, and then that leads to arguments and confusion. That's a person versus person type of problem. Next, we have person versus nature over here. So in Puerto Rico, we had a person versus nature problem, which was Hurricane Maria. But more recently, we also had the earthquakes, and we're currently going through a pandemic. So those are person versus nature issues. There's plenty of movies that show this type of conflict, where they show earthquakes, or they show thunderstorms, or they show all sorts of natural events that we cannot control. Then over here we have person versus society. So as you can see in the picture, that's one individual going against a whole group of individuals who have similar beliefs usually. So for example, we can take Martin Luther King, who went up against a huge group of society who had racist beliefs at the time. Now, in stories, sometimes the individual that goes against society doesn't necessarily always win, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try in your life. Okay? So even though it seems like the harder option to go against the current, sometimes we have to do it. Okay? So think of Martin Luther King or Rosa Parks going against society. Okay? No, you don't have to always jump on the bandwagon because the possibilities of you winning are going to be lower or whatnot. Then here at the bottom left, we have person versus technology. So here I always think about iRobot, but that might be a little old for you. So for you, maybe you would think Black Mirror or any of these shows where they have robots taking over the world or that sort of thing. However, a more realistic example would be, let's say that you are completing an assignment on your phone, and then your phone runs out of battery or the internet isn't working. That's a person versus technology type of problem. That's much more common. Or we could talk about a laptop catching a virus. Totally common person versus technology conflict. Then right next to that one, we have person versus supernatural. I know some of you watch a show called Supernatural, so that's basically it. If we have a conflict with a fairy or a werewolf or a vampire or any of these things that we cannot explain, which are not natural and do not exist in the real world, all of these are supernatural. And then when we are having an issue with one of these supernatural, that's the type of conflict that we're going for. And then finally, at the bottom right, we have person versus himself or herself. That means an internal conflict that is causing an issue on the external world. Like, for example, let's say that you want to join a dance competition, but you're like, maybe I'm not good enough, I don't have the flexibility or whatever. Those are self-esteem issues that are inhibiting you from doing what you want to do. So that's a problem that is within yourself, and it's not because of other people, it's because of you. Okay? Now, it's important for me to mention that some stories have several types of conflict at the same time. Okay? It's not always the case for short stories. They do try to have just one conflict, but it can happen that that conflict kind of falls under several of these. So keep that in mind. Okay, then we have author's point of view. We've also talked about this before. First, we have first person, which uses the pronouns I and we. For example, I woke up this morning and I picked up my ukulele and I played a song with my friends. Second person, it's much less common. That's when the author is kind of talking, or the narrator is kind of talking to you as a reader. So he uses the pronoun you. So it would go something like, you woke up this morning, you picked up the ukulele, and then you played with your friends. Then finally, we have the third person, which uses the pronouns he, she, it, and they. This is kind of like an outsider looking in and describing what they are watching. For example, she woke up this morning, she picked up her ukulele, and then she and her friends played for a little bit. Okay, now third person gets subdivided into three types of third person narrator, which is objective, limited omniscient, and omniscient. An objective third person narrator is a narrator that is looking from the outside and simply describing what he or she is seeing. They have no insight on any of the characters. A limited omniscient third person narrator has insight on one single character. They know their viewpoint, they know what that character thinks, sees, hears, feels, but only that one character, not everybody else. And then finally, we have the omniscient third person narrator, which knows what every single character is thinking, how they're behaving, what their motivations are. Okay, so they have unlimited information about the character. So objective, outsider looking in, just describing, no insight. Limited omniscient has insight on one character. Omniscient has insight on every single character. Okay, but all of these are observing from the outside and they are not a part of the story. Whereas first person is telling their own story and second person is kind of talking to the reader. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about types of endings, and we have not seen this before actually. There are actually several types of endings, but for now I just want to look at open endings and close endings. An open ending is unresolved. It's also known as implicit. Basically, what that means is that the author doesn't actually tell you what happened in the end. You have to kind of come to your own assumptions, make your own inferences, and just figure out what you think happened. Now, one example of this is the movie Inception. If you've seen that movie has an open ending. You don't really know what happens in the end. If he was sleeping, if he was not sleeping, if that was the reality, you don't know. And then we have a closed ending. There's no ambiguity. We know exactly what happened in the end. It's also known as explicit. It explicitly tells you at the end of the story what the events that occurred were. Okay, so keep this in mind because later on I might ask you about the story, okay, if it's an open or closed ending, okay? Open, like open to interpretation, and closed, like case closed. This is what happened, that's it, okay? All right. Then I wanted to talk about making inferences. This is also new. What is that? What does that word mean? This word right here. It is a conclusion that a reader makes while reading or after reading. This conclusion is based on what the reader knows outside of the text, plus information that is presented in the text, like a guess. Okay, so there's what you already know, then what you learned from the reading, and what you can infer based on those clues that the reading has given you. Okay, so it's something that is not explicitly said in the story, and you're just taking all the clues and all the details from your own knowledge and from the text to come to these conclusions. Okay, it's important that you learn to infer and make these inferences because eventually in standardized tests like pruebas meta, they will ask you to do this, okay? So you have to be able to take what you know and take what the author is telling you and figure out what that might mean. Okay, now that we've covered all of that, I have a challenge for you. I want you to read the story The Necklace by Guy de Maupassant, which is a really good story, and I think you will enjoy it. Okay, read it carefully, and then after that, you're going to access the following link or use the challenge pin to participate in a Kahoot challenge. So I know how much you like Kahoot. Of course, we can't actually use Kahoot live like we would in the classroom, but I've found a way for us to use it together. You're going to use it on your own time. I'm going to give you 1 whole week to go to the Kahoot and complete the questions. It's going to be open and available until Saturday, May 2nd at 8 a.m. So make sure that you access that Kahoot before then. It's just a series of questions. The questions are about the story of the necklace, as it relates to the topics that we just discussed. So expect to find questions about story elements, expect to find questions about making inferences, and everything else that we've just covered, types of endings and such in this Kahoot challenge. The challenge pin, if you cannot see it very well, is 01039021. Okay, that is the Kahoot challenge pin. But if you don't want to use that pin, you can also just click on the link. I've already posted it on the Remind page. Okay, so you can just click on that link. It'll take you straight to the challenge, and we can see who really understood this story. Okay, game on. All right, good luck to everybody. I hope you've understood everything that we've covered today, and if not, please let me know. I'm here for you. I will be available on Remind tomorrow from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. So just make sure you have any questions that you let me know. Okay? All right, well, that's it for today. I'll see you all. I won't see you, but I'll talk to you all next Saturday. I hope you have a wonderful week, and best of luck on that Kahoot challenge. Show me what you're made of. Bye, everybody.